The wind moved softly across the dry land, carrying dust and the faint smell of old wood and sunburnt earth. Out there, where the road gave up and silence took over, a small grave sat beneath a crooked fence. It wasn't much to look at, just a worn stone with a name that had started to fade. But to the little girl lying beside it, it was everything. She pressed her cheek against the cool surface of the grave, her small fingers curled tightly into the dirt, as if letting go would mean losing her all over again. Her dress, once pale yellow, was now stained with dust and days of being out in the open. She had stopped caring about that. She had stopped caring about most things. "Mom, don't leave me," she whispered again, her voice barely louder than the wind. No one answered. No one ever did. 3 days had passed like that. 3 long days under the open sky. The sun burned during the day and the cold crept in at night, but she didn't move. She barely ate, barely slept. Folks from the nearby town had come once or twice, standing at a distance, unsure what to do. Some left bread, some left water. None stayed long enough to change anything. Because grief like that wasn't something you could fix with kind words, not out here. Not in a place where people learned early that life could be taken as quickly as it was given. The old man from the stable had said she'd wander off eventually. The woman from the general store shook her head and said the child had her mother's stubborn spirit. A preacher came by on the second day, speaking softly about heaven and peace, but the girl didn't look at him. She just stayed there, her eyes fixed on the name carved in stone. The truth was, nobody really knew what to do with a child who had nothing left. Her mother had been all she had. No father anyone could name, no family nearby. Just the two of them in a small wooden house at the edge of town. People remembered her mother as quiet but kind. Always working, always tired, but never too tired to smile at her little girl. And now that smile was gone. The world had kept moving anyway. Horses still passed by on the road, the saloons still filled with voices at night. Life didn't pause for sorrow, not even the kind that settled deep into a child's bones. By the third evening, the sky turned a deep shade of orange, the kind that made everything look softer than it really was. The girl hadn't said much all day. She just lay there, her breathing slow, her strength fading in ways she didn't understand. Her small hand rested against the grave, as if she could still feel a heartbeat through the stone. That's when the sound came. At first it was faint. The slow creak of leather, the steady rhythm of hooves pressing against dry ground. Someone was coming down the long road that nobody used unless they had a reason. The girl didn't lift her head right away. But the horse stopped. Silence followed, thicker than before. Boots touched the ground. Heavy, measured steps moved closer, stopping just a few feet away. The kind of steps that carried stories with them. The kind of steps that didn't belong to just anyone. For a moment, nothing happened. Then a shadow stretched across the grave, falling over the girl like a question waiting to be answered. She slowly opened her eyes. And for the first time in 3 days, she looked up. The man stood still for a moment, as if he wasn't sure whether to step closer or turn back the way he came. Dust clung to his boots and the edges of his coat, and his hat cast a shadow that hid most of his face. The horse behind him let out a quiet breath, shifting its weight as the evening settled deeper into the land. The girl blinked slowly, her eyes tired and dry, but she didn't move away. She just looked at him, as if trying to understand why someone had come now, after everyone else had already left her alone with her grief. "You shouldn't be out here," the man said quietly. His voice was rough, like it had been worn down by years of silence more than speech. She didn't answer. Most people expected answers from children. He didn't seem to. Instead, he crouched down, keeping a careful distance, his gaze moving from the girl to the grave and back again. His eyes softened just a little when he noticed how small her hand looked against the stone. "That your ma?" he asked. The girl nodded once. It was a small, slow movement, but it said everything. The man exhaled through his nose and looked out toward the horizon, where the last light of the sun was slipping away. "Hard thing," he muttered, almost to himself. "Losing someone like that?" She swallowed, her voice barely holding together. "She said she wouldn't go." The words hung in the air, fragile and heavy at the same time. He didn't reply right away. Instead, he reached into his coat and pulled out a small canteen. He placed it gently on the ground near her, not too close, like he understood she might not want anything from him. "You need water," he said. "3 days out here will take more than you think." She looked at the canteen but didn't reach for it. Her fingers tightened slightly against the dirt. Back in town, people had already started talking. Word spread quickly in a place that's small. Some said the stranger looked like trouble the moment they saw him ride in. Others said he carried himself like someone who had seen too much to be afraid of anything anymore. The stable boy claimed the man didn't give a name when asked, just handed over a coin and took care of his own horse. The woman at the store said his eyes didn't match his voice, like there was something deeper hiding behind them. No one knew why he had come, and no one had followed him out here. The girl shifted slightly, her strength fading as the cool air settled in. The ground was harder now than it had been during the day, but she didn't complain. She had stopped noticing that kind of thing. "Did they tell you to come?" she asked suddenly, her voice thin but steady. The man frowned a little. "Who?" "The people in town." He shook his head. "No." She studied him for a moment, as if deciding whether to believe that. Then her gaze drifted back to the grave. "She gets cold at night," the girl said softly. "I stay so she won't be alone." The man looked at the stone again, then at the child lying beside it. Something in his expression shifted, not quite pity, not quite understanding, but something close to both. "She ain't cold," he said gently. "Not where she is now," the girl didn't argue, but she didn't agree either. A long silence followed, broken only by the quiet sounds of the evening settling in. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote called out, its voice stretching across the land. The man stood up slowly, his joints stiff from the movement. He glanced back toward his horse, then down at the girl again. For a moment, it looked like he might leave her there just like everyone else had. But he didn't. Instead, he stepped closer to the grave, close enough to read the worn name carved into the stone. His eyes lingered there longer than expected, his expression tightening in a way that didn't match the calm tone he had used before. He reached out, brushing a bit of dust away from the letters with his thumb. Then he froze. Something about that name had stopped him cold. The girl noticed. "You knew her?" she said quietly. It wasn't a question. The man didn't answer right away. His hand slowly dropped to his side, and for the first time since he arrived, there was something uncertain in his stance. The wind picked up again, stirring the dry grass and carrying a sense of something changing, something neither of them fully understood yet. When he finally spoke, his voice was lower than before. "Maybe," he said. But the way he said it made it clear that whatever he wasn't saying mattered far more than what he was. The girl pushed herself up just enough to see his face more clearly. Her small body trembled from the effort, but she didn't seem to notice. "You knew her," she repeated, a little stronger this time. The man looked down at her, then back at the grave. The fading light made the letters harder to read, but whatever he had seen was already burned into his mind. His jaw tightened, and for a moment it felt like he had stepped into a place far away from that quiet patch of land. "I said maybe," he replied, though the words came slower now. The girl watched him carefully. She had spent 3 days in silence, learning how to listen to things people didn't say. "You're lying," she whispered. That caught him off guard. He let out a short breath, almost like a tired laugh, but there was no humor in it. "You don't waste time, do you?" She didn't answer. Her eyes stayed fixed on him, steady and searching. The man looked away first. Back in town, the sheriff had started asking questions. A stranger riding in alone always meant something, and folks had seen enough trouble pass through to know when to pay attention. He stood outside the small office, looking down the empty road, his thumb hooked in his belt. "He's still out there?" someone asked. "Last I heard," the sheriff replied. "By the old graveyard." The man speaking to him shook his head. "That girl ain't moved. People are saying it's not right, leaving her like that." The sheriff didn't respond right away. He had seen grief before, and he knew there wasn't a clean way to handle it. Still, something about the stranger didn't sit well with him. "Keep an eye on things," he said finally. "If he brings trouble, I want to know before it reaches town." Out by the grave, the air had turned colder. The last light was slipping away, leaving behind long shadows that stretched across the dry ground. The girl pulled her legs in slightly, her strength fading more with each passing hour. The man noticed. "You keep this up, you won't last another night," he said quietly. "I'm not leaving her," she replied. He nodded once like he expected that answer. Figured as much. He walked back to his horse and reached into a worn saddlebag. When he returned, he carried a small blanket. Without saying a word, he set it down near her, close enough for her to reach. She looked at it but didn't move. "You can use it," he said. "Don't mean you're leaving." After a long moment, she slowly pulled it closer, wrapping it around herself without taking her eyes off him. It wasn't trust, not yet, but it was something. "You still didn't say how you knew her," she said. The man sat down on the edge of the grave, keeping his distance from both the girl and the stone. His gaze drifted out into the darkening land. "Your ma," he began, then stopped. The words didn't come easy, that much was clear. "She wasn't always here," he said after a while. "Long time ago, she was somewhere else, somewhere louder than this. Harder, too." The girl listened, her grip tightening on the blanket. "She ever tell you about that?" he asked. She shook her head. "Didn't think so." Another silence fell between them, heavier than before. The man rubbed his hands together slowly, like he was trying to warm them, though the cold didn't seem to bother him as much as whatever memory he was holding on to. "I knew her back then," he said finally. "Before she came out here, before she had you." The girl's breath caught slightly. "Why didn't you come before?" That question landed harder than anything else. The man didn't answer right away. His eyes dropped to the ground, and for the first time there was something close to regret in them. "Some roads take longer than they should," he said quietly. "That's not an answer." "No," he admitted. "It ain't." In the distance, a faint light flickered from the direction of town. Someone was moving out there, maybe more than one. The man noticed it, his posture shifting just enough to show he was paying attention. The girl followed his gaze. "Are they coming here?" "Maybe," he said. "Will they make me leave?" He didn't respond immediately. Instead, he looked back at the grave, then at the child wrapped in a blanket under the open sky. "They might try," he said. Her fingers curled tightly again, the same way they had on the first day. "I won't go." "I know." The wind picked up once more, carrying dust and something else with it. Something unsettled. The man stood slowly, his eyes moving between the distant lights and the name on the grave. Whatever connection he had to that name was no longer something he could ignore. And now, it seemed, neither could anyone else. The lights from town grew brighter against the dark, moving slowly along the narrow road like a warning that could not be ignored. The man stood still, watching them, his shoulders tense now in a way that had not shown before. Whatever quiet he carried when he first arrived had started to crack. The girl pulled the blanket tighter around herself and followed his gaze. "They're coming for me," she said, her voice small but certain. "They're coming because they're worried," he replied, though his tone carried doubt. "They'll take me away from her." He didn't answer that. Instead, he stepped closer to the grave again, staring down at the name as if it might change if he looked long enough. The wind brushed past them, colder now, carrying the sound of approaching horses, faint but steady. "You said you knew her," the girl pressed. "Then tell me why you left her alone." The words hit harder this time. The man closed his eyes for a brief second, like he had been holding something back for too long. "I didn't know she came here," he said quietly. "Not until it was too late." "That's not true," the girl said. "People always know. They just don't come." He looked at her then, really looked at her. There was something in her face that reminded him too much of the past, something he couldn't turn away from anymore. "You sound just like her," he murmured. The girl didn't react to that. She only pointed at the grave. "She's there. And I'm staying." The sound of hooves grew louder. Now it was clear there was more than one rider. Voices carried through the night air, still too far to understand, but close enough to feel. The man turned slightly, positioning himself between the road and the girl without making it obvious. His hand rested near his side, not reaching for anything, but ready all the same. "You ever think," he said slowly, "that staying here ain't what she'd want for you?" The girl shook her head at once. "She wouldn't want me to leave her alone. She ain't alone." "She is," the girl insisted, her voice breaking for the first time. Everyone left. Even you. That last part hung heavy between them. The man looked away again, his jaw tightening. The truth was sitting right there, plain and sharp. He had left. Whatever reason he carried did not change that. The riders were close now. Shapes began to form in the darkness, figures on horseback moving with purpose. The lead rider raised a hand, signaling the others to slow as they approached the graveyard. "Stay where you are," a voice called out. It was firm, used to being followed. The sheriff, the man didn't move. The girl shrank slightly under the blanket but didn't pull away from the grave. The horses came to a stop a short distance away, their breaths visible in the cool air. The sheriff stepped down first, his boots hitting the ground with a quiet thud. His eyes moved from the girl to the stranger, measuring the distance, the tension, the unknown. "You picked a strange place to rest?" the sheriff said. The man gave a small nod. "Wasn't planning on staying." "Funny," the sheriff replied. "Looks like you already have." The silence that followed was thick. The other men stayed mounted, watching closely, their presence adding weight to every second. The sheriff took a few steps closer, careful and steady. "We've got a child here who hasn't eaten right in days," he said. "Town's concerned." "She ain't going," the man said quietly. That shifted everything. The sheriff stopped walking. His expression hardened just enough. "That ain't your call?" The girl looked up at the man, her eyes wide now. "Don't let them take me," she whispered. He didn't look down at her, but his hand tightened slightly at his side. "This doesn't need to turn into trouble," the sheriff continued. "Step aside. Let us do what's right." The man's gaze flickered back to the grave one last time, then to the girl wrapped in that thin blanket, holding on to something no one else could see. "What's right ain't always simple," he said. The wind rushed through again, stronger now, lifting dust into the air as if the land itself was holding its breath. The riders shifted. The sheriff took another step forward, and in that moment it became clear that whatever happened next would change everything. For a long moment no one moved. The wind settled just enough for the silence to feel heavier than before. The sheriff stood his ground, the men behind him watching closely, waiting for a sign of what would come next. The man finally lowered his hand and took a slow breath. "I'm not here to fight," he said, his voice steady but firm. "But that child don't belong out here alone anymore." "That's exactly why we came," the sheriff replied. "Step aside, and we'll take her somewhere safe." The girl shook her head quickly, clutching the blanket tighter. "No, I'm not leaving her," she said, her voice trembling but determined. The man glanced down at her, then back at the sheriff. Something shifted in his eyes, something that looked less like resistance and more like a decision finally being made. "She ain't leaving her," he said. "But she don't have to stay here to remember." The sheriff frowned slightly. "What are you getting at?" The man hesitated for just a second, then looked at the grave again. "Her ma didn't come out here to be alone. She came to start over, to give the girl something better." He paused, his voice softening. "I knew her before all this. Before she ran from the life she had, she wanted peace. That's what she told me." The girl looked up at him, confused but listening. "She never talked about you," she said. "I reckon she had her reasons," he replied quietly. "Some things folks leave behind for good reason. But she never would have wanted you to fade away beside a stone." The sheriff crossed his arms, still cautious. "And you think you know what she wanted better than anyone here?" The man didn't answer right away. Instead, he reached into his coat and pulled out something small, worn with age. He stepped forward slowly and placed it on the grave. The girl leaned closer to see it. It was an old locket, scratched and simple. "She gave me that years ago," he said. "Told me if I ever found her again, I'd know it was time to do right by her." The girl stared at the locket, then at the name carved into the stone. Her fingers slowly reached out, brushing against it. "You really knew her," she whispered. He nodded. "I did. And I failed her once." His voice grew heavier. "I'm not doing that again." The sheriff studied him carefully, weighing every word. The tension in the air began to ease, just slightly. "What are you saying?" the sheriff asked. "I'm saying she don't have to be alone anymore," the man replied, glancing at the girl. "If she let me, I'll take care of her." "Not just tonight, for good." The words settled over everyone. The girl looked uncertain, her eyes moving between the grave and the man. "You'd stay?" she asked. "I would," he said. "Long as you need, and I can come back here." "Any time you want?" She looked down at the grave again, her small hand resting gently on the stone. For the first time in 3 days her grip softened. "She won't be alone?" she asked quietly. The man knelt beside her, not too close, but close enough to be heard. "She won't," he said. "Not as long as you carry her with you?" The girl took a shaky breath. The fear in her eyes didn't disappear, but something else appeared beside it. Something lighter. The sheriff let out a slow breath and nodded once. "If the child agrees," he said, "then we'll see it done proper." The other men relaxed in their saddles, the tension finally breaking. The girl looked up at the man one more time. "You promise?" she asked. "I promise." She hesitated, then slowly pushed herself up, her legs weak but steady enough. The blanket slipped slightly as she stood, but she didn't fall. Her hand lingered on the grave for a final moment. Then, with a quiet nod, she stepped away. The man stood with her, not rushing, not forcing, just staying close as she made the choice herself. The wind passed gently over the land, no longer harsh, just soft enough to carry the dust away. Behind them, the grave remained, still and quiet, but no longer holding everything the girl had left. As they walked toward the waiting horses, the night didn't feel as empty anymore. And for the first time since she whispered those words, she wasn't asking her mother not to leave. She was learning how to move forward without losing her.